Craig Johnson is the New York Times best-selling author of the Walt Longmire Mystery Series, which has garnered popular and critical acclaim, and is the basis for the hit Netflix drama titled simply Longmire. Craig Johnson, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Good to be here.
So when you began writing about Walt Longmire, did you intend it to be a series, or was that a concept that kind of came about after the first book was completed?
Yeah, no, it wasn't at all. Like it was just supposed to be a standalone book. Was what it was supposed to be. The first novel in what became a series, like that, was called The Cold Dish. And I think I don't know. I mean, I guess it varies for a lot of authors, but I guess whenever I first started out, I was just stunned, that if all I wanted was if I could get one book published, I thought that would be pretty amazing. So I would just had my fingers crossed for that. So the idea of actually, having a series of books or something was just, otherworldly. So I just, I just, hoped and prayed that maybe, just maybe I could get this, this one book, published. And, I guess, there were some things that, worked for that and worked against that. I mean, one of the dirty little secrets is that the first draft of The Cold Dish was actually about 650 pages long. It was kind of like War and Peace in Observateur County, where I think I made the mistake that I think a lot of beginning authors make, where I thought, okay, if I can fool them into publishing this one book, then they are never going to publish another one. So I'm putting everything in this book. And so I did, and it was way too long and way too much, and I did, that actually taught me a good lesson, for subsequent books, because I tend to write long. Like I tend to, have a little bit too much in the first draft, but then what that makes you capable of being able to go back and, kind of chopping and channeling everything and taking out all the stuff that really doesn't have any reason to be in there, or, elaborating on the things that, really do need to be in there. And, that was, kind of how it all started. But I think on the positive side, I really did my best to try and give a full-fledged world, to that first book, in an ensemble of characters and a definition of place that I think, was very helpful in continuing on, with those characters, because I had so many questions, even as much as I had put in there, the more you put in, the more questions, there are.
Right.
And so I was looking for, opportunities to maybe tell some more stories, about some of the other characters that are in that first book. And that kind of opened it up, for the opportunity to be able to write a series like that. And I have to give credit where credit's due, that it was Catherine Court, the president of Penguin, who sat me down and said, we really like these characters. We really think that they've got, a life, and we think that, people are going to want to know more about them and about the relationships and about the place. And we think this has the opportunity of being a really wonderful series. And that's when I, with the knowledge of not even having had, one book published, started arguing with the president of Penguin USA and saying, I don't think that'll work. I don't think that's a really good idea, but I've got some other ideas I want to bounce off of you. And she said, why don't you go back to your ranch and sit down and think about this, because we think that, we think it does, and we think it will. And so, of course, like an idiot, I came back and started thinking about it, and I thought, okay, yeah, you know what? There are a lot of questions, especially about the characters. About, like Walt's relationship, with Vic, and his history with Henry, and, Lucian and all of these other characters, the only way to find out about those things was to continue on and to do some more stories like that. And I think a lot of it comes down to character. A lot of it does, no matter what the source of entertainment, whether it be movies, whether it be TV shows, whether it be games, novels, whatever, it's always going to come down to character. Whenever I'm doing writer's writer's workshops, I'm always, telling students that, the big thing is character. Whenever the books got turned into a TV show, one of the things that happened was these big agencies out in Los Angeles, periodically what they'll do is they'll send an agent, to the literary agencies in New York, to just kind of like, throw a net out and see if they can find, material that might work, as a television show, or as a movie or something along those lines. And it was interesting to me because the agent that came from CAA that went into my literary agent's office and was looking for kind of netting out there to see if they could trolling and see if they could find some material. The thing she asked for was, she says, we're looking for material with really strong characters. That's what she said. She didn't say Western. She didn't say mystery. She didn't say, anything other than we're looking for material with really, really strong characters. And I think that there's a lesson to be learned in that, because people are always wondering, how do I get my book published? How do I get my TV show made? How do I get my movie done? All of these things, and it's always going to come back to the characters. It's, if you're not interested, if you're not involved, if they don't draw you in, and, literally, make themselves, a part of your life, to where you actually care about them in some way, then I think, you've got an uphill battle to try and get something done.
I think you're absolutely right about the character side of it, and you've done such a great job of creating those. So, but Longmire is a different kind of hero. Certainly not like the six-pack abs, invincible guy that so often shows up in books as the hero. Why did you decide to take a different route when creating his character?
Well, I think, a lot of times, whenever you're doing any kind of creative, capacity, I think the first thing you have to look at and see, which direction everybody's running in, and then go the other direction, and try and do something different. And, it's, for me, it was pretty simple like that because it just made him, more real, than, those comic book characters that you see. And, whenever I would like run into, the investigators, or detectives or anything like that, they couldn't go spend 4 hours in the gym every day. That's just not, their life did not allow for that. They were out doing the job, and so for me, like that Walt became, kind of emblematic of that, everyman kind of aspect where, he's more like us is what he is. Like, I mean, I don't know you physically, like, and so I can't speak for you. You may have those six-pack abs. I don't know. Like,
no.
I don't. And I don't know. I mean, I just find that to be kind of an untruth. Whenever I'm looking at those characters, they're fine for like for comic books and that kind of thing like that. But for a real character, for a real person, I think you've got to delve a little bit deeper. And Walt's, what I tend to refer to as that sadder but wiser, kind of character. He's lived a life, like he's had things happen to him like that, and some of it good, some of it bad, and but the big thing about him is that he still gets up in the morning and tries to do the job. He's got that tenacity that allows him, to continue on, when everybody else would give up. He'll knock on one more door. He'll make one more phone call. He'll go through one more transcript, of an interrogation or an interview. And, if you're out there and you're doing bad things, he's the last guy that you want after you because he's not going to give up. He does have that tenacity. There were two things I kind of gave him. One was that tenacity, and the other was a sense of humor, which I think is another aspect that's sometimes missing. A lot of the time in this type of material, like that. Anybody that's ever had a tough job knows that the way that you get through to the end of the day, you're going to do one of two things at the end of the day. You're either going to laugh or you're going to cry, and I know which one it is that I would rather do. And so for me, it becomes really kind of essential to have that development of character to where they all have very distinctive voices, where they all have very distinctive senses of humor. And I just think that it makes the characters, infinitely more believable, and certainly makes them, more fun to be around when they have a sense of humor. I mean, when I'm doing writers' workshops, and I'm working with young writers, one of the big questions they'll always ask is, how do you get, readers to empathize, with your characters? How do you get them to really, connect, with their characters? And I'm always like, well, who do you like hanging around with? People that, make you laugh. Give your characters a sense of humor. Let them realize the situations that they're in, or, what it is that they're dealing with, with a sense of humor. That's what we all do every day, and it's kind of important. And inevitably the next thing out of their mouth is, yeah, but what if I'm not funny? And then you're like, well, then you've got a problem. To me, you need to try and develop that sense of humor a little bit. I don't know. But that's like trying to teach people how to be funny is like trying to teach them not to sweat.
Right.
It's really kind of impossible. But I think it's something you can work at, like a lot of things like that. I mean, you're very rarely are you going to go into any art, any form of art, and be, absolutely secure in, every facet of it. You're going to have to work on the weaknesses. I mean, you obviously, try and utilize as much of your strengths as possible, but also realize that, there's weaknesses you need to work at too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think all of us, just speaking specifically as writers, have our strengths and our weaknesses, and just learning how to minimize the weaknesses and capitalize on the strengths can make all the difference. But speaking of personalities, your wife has been quoted as saying that Walt Longmire is who Craig Johnson would like to be in 10 years. It's just that he's off to an incredibly slow start. Are you making any progress on that front? Are you gaining on Longmire at all? What would she say?
I've been writing Walt for 14 years now, and I like to think that I have made small increments of advancing myself as a better person. But I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe I'm losing ground. I don't know. But I don't know. I mean, that definitely is one of those things. I mean, one of my favorite quotes on writing is the one from Wallace Stegner, where he says the greatest piece of fiction ever written is the disclaimer at the beginning of every book that says nobody in this book is based off anybody alive or dead. And what a crock that is, And so, I think, whenever you're writing a character in first person, I mean, that's 300 pages of, basically a stream of consciousness, internal monologue, because, basically what Walt's thinking the whole time. And so a certain amount of yourself is going to have to leak, into that character.
Sure.
To a certain extent, and I think there are aspects, certainly the sense of humor, I like to think, is something that we share. I think a sense of justice, I think, is another thing that we share. I'm a big believer in a level playing field, that everybody gets the same treatment, that everybody gets the same chance to do the right thing, and those are all important to me. But then there are also aspects of Walt's character that are so completely alien to me. The fact that, he has, led an entire life, basically, once he lost his deferment, in California at USC playing football, in the 60s, and was drafted, and went into the military as a military police officer, and then came back to Wyoming, and the only job that was available was a deputy sheriff, and then graduating from that to being a sheriff. His entire life has been in law enforcement, and so I think it's given him a really definitive, kind of view of, how it is to do his job, whereas I've kind of been a jack of all trades and, master of none, where I've bounced around and done all these different things like that. And I think that, that gives him a very, clear, perspective on things. The other thing that's, that's a major part of his character is he's had a lot of tragedies in his life, mostly, the biggest one, of course, being the loss of his wife. And I haven't had those kind of tragedies in my life, and so I don't have that kind of deep-seated depression that I think, is something that he battles against, with that sense of humor, with that camaraderie, with the people that he works with, and with Henry and all of his friends on the reservation. I think that he combats that, to a great extent, almost on a daily basis like that. And I think that that's one of the key elements to a dramatic conflict, within the character, and not just, plot driven, but, actually, within himself.
Speaking of the Netflix show, so the books obviously have been made into the long-running show, highly popular, but how close is the show to the books, and what are some things that they've changed between the two mediums?
Well, I was very fortunate, in the sense that I kind of went into it, with my eyes open, realizing that this is a collaborative effort, that it takes, a village, to kind of get this kind of thing off the ground. And you hear and see, like all of these, situations where, these writers are unhappy, with what it is that's been done, with their work, and they would have preferred this, they would have preferred that. And my immediate response to that is, well, then you shouldn't have taken the check, should you?
Yeah,
You should have,
right.
said no, when they ask you to sign on the dotted line, rather than, doing this like 11th hour bitching session, where,
Right.
you're unhappy, with what it is that was done. I mean, the biggest, probability that you have as a writer, in these, the strongest power that you have in these situations is before it gets done. You need to, realize, who these people are that you're working with, what it is that they've done. And so I was, very fortunate in that, what I got, from Warner Brothers, was, and CAA was, more of a collective agreement like that, where it was a package deal where I got to meet the directors and the producers and the writers and everybody before, I signed on the dotted line. And, they were marvelous people. They had a really incredible track record, of all of these shows that they had done. And I thought, okay, this might just work. And like I said, kind of going into it with my eyes open, realizing that there were probably going to be some changes made. Because what makes for, a good book series or what makes for a really good novel might not work the best for a television series or for a movie. There are going to be changes, that they're going to have to make. And like I said, it's a collaborative effort. So, you've got, the producers have their input, the directors have their input, the actors have their input, all the way down to the costuming people have input, and the set people have input, and location people have input. Even, when you're dealing with television, the advertisers, suddenly have input, and so you kind of have to be open to the idea that things are probably going to change a little bit. But then that doesn't make it always easy. I remember one of the first meetings that I had with the producers, they said, well, we're thinking about making Walt and Henry about 10 years younger than they are in your books. And I had the immediate, redneck cowboy, author response where I was like, well, now why are we doing that? And they said, well, because, we'd really like the TV show to run for about 10 or 12 years, and we'd rather not have Walt and Henry on walkers by the time we got through to the end. And so, I kind of had a hard time arguing with that. Right. And so, I think, you just have to realize that there are going to be changes. And I think we were extraordinarily fortunate because, one of the first things they said to me was also hey, your books don't break down to a 42-minute teleplay very easily. And I said, thank God. If they did, you shouldn't be reading them. So they could only fit so much of a book into a 42-minute teleplay. And since we had a lot of pressure from the original network that had us, that they wanted beginnings, middles, and ends, to all the episodes, which changed, whenever we went over to Netflix, it was going to have an effect. And I think they did a pretty marvelous job, really kind of working with the limitations that they had and doing the things that they did. And then, of course, then there's the casting that they did, which was spectacular. Yeah. The casting people were actually the ones that do all of the HBO shows, and they went out on a search and did an absolutely magnificent job, in finding Robert Taylor and Katee Sackoff and Diamond Phillips, Leigh Martinez, Adam Bartley, all of these really incredible actors that were just waiting in the wings that maybe had not had the opportunity to really kind of get their wings out there and stretch them, in something that's maybe a more realistic kind of drama of, the contemporary American West, and with a depth of character that, that maybe they hadn't had a chance to work with before. And, they really, showed what it was that they could do. Once again, it goes back to character, and, we were extraordinarily fortunate to have some very, very talented people, to do the show with.
Yeah, they are absolutely fantastic, and I think you were wise to go into it with your eyes open in that regard, because writing is such a solitary thing, but there isn't a field much more collaborative than film. That's not one of those things you can do by yourself.
No, not at all. Like, and it's and I, because the writers' room, the Longmire had a writers' room where they had this entire group of writers, and the producers would be in there, and the directors would be in there, and like all these people in the writers' room as they're hashing out, these episodes, which they would send to me, and I would give them feedback. But it always sounded like hell to me, because there you are in a room full of people arguing for your ideas, and I don't do that very well. I don't work and play well with others. When it's my characters in my world, I want it my way, which is why I live, in a little ranch in Ucross, Wyoming, population 25, near the Wyoming-Montana border. That's what I like. That's what I love. That's my life. But I don't know. I don't know if I completely answered your previous question, which is, the characters are very similar, to the books. At the world that they live in is very similar. They used bits and pieces, from the books, there were actually episodes that used, large plot lines from the books. But most certainly, they kind of went on some different directions, and they were pretty smart about it, because one of the things that they said to me is that, we don't want to slavishly reproduce the books, because we don't want to ruin the books for all the people that are going to see the TV show. And then again, we also don't want to ruin the TV show for all the millions of people that have read the books.
Right.
And so I'm always consistently amazed. Every once in a while I'll meet somebody and they'll say, "Oh, well, I would read your books, but I've already seen the television show, so I guess I don't have." And I'm like, "Oh no, you can jump in and and read the books. It won't hurt you one bit. You're in for a whole other universe in all actuality, and it doesn't hurt to approach one from the other."
Right. Awesome. Well, what are you working on right now? Something that we can look forward to from you?
Well, let's see. I've got Land of Wolves, which is from a Basque proverb that a land of strangers is a land of wolves. That's the book that comes out on September 17th. And then I'm working on the next Walt book that's for 2 years from now, which is called The Next to Last Stand. And then I've got a couple of other projects that I'm working on that appear to be getting a little bit of traction out in Los Angeles. I've got a feature film that I'm working on, and then actually a pilot for a potential other television series like that. So we'll see what happens. Keep your fingers crossed.
Absolutely. Well, we definitely keeping tabs on it and looking forward to, pretty much anything you come up with. So, Craig Johnson, thank you so much for coming on this show. I appreciate your time.
My pleasure. My pleasure. This was a joy.